Straw Hut Media.
I'm David Wild, and I say don't be alone with Jake Hogan. That's usually a court order. It's usually a restraining order, but it's really just a promo now.
Don't be alone with Jake Hogan.
Hi there, and welcome to Don't Be Alone with Jake Hogan. I'm Jake Hogan. I'm thrilled that you're here. I've been getting a lot of positive feedback on the show, and I've been really enjoying it. And I like feedback of all kinds. I want to interact with you. So please feel free to email me at dbawjk@gmail.com, dbawjk@gmail.com. We will have a conversation on email if that suits you. Or you can just talk to me as I do the podcast. I won't respond so well because I won't be hearing you, but you can imagine that we're having a conversation, and that will be fine if you live in that kind of weird-ass fantasy world. What's wrong with you? Anyway, I'm so glad you're here today because I have a wonderful guest. The journalist, producer, writer, author, David Wild is here to talk about his career, his life, but more importantly, he's going to help me with my problem, which is I get concerned that when I ask people to do things, including this podcast, I feel a little pushy, and I feel a little bit like a stalker, and I feel a little bit like I'm bugging people, because I kind of am bugging people. David seems to wander through his life meeting the greatest celebrities of all time and never ever feel like he has to ask twice. The door is open for him. He gets to meet everybody, and there's not a single iota of worry about, well, am I being too pushy? Because he's not too pushy. He just sort of hints at it. If he hints at he'd like to meet the royal family, they would fly him out to London. I mean, I have friends, lifelong friends that I ask to do things, and they say, not now. It's a problem. David might have the answer to this problem, and we'll talk about it, and we'll see how far we get. But we'll talk about that and many other things. Please subscribe to this show on YouTube. That you don't have to watch. You just have to press subscribe and then never, ever watch my show. But subscribe to this on YouTube and like it and subscribe to it on whatever else you're listening to. The many, many platforms it's on. The more likes that the show gets, the more positive feedback I get, and plus I can keep the lights on here at Don't Be Alone with Jake Hogan Studios. It's not a big request. Just subscribe. Press a button. It's easy. If you don't know how to do it, ask your kids. Ask your kids how to do it. Anyway, we'll be right back with David Wild right after this.
Don't be alone with Jake Hogan.
Here, David Wild, if I'm not mistaken.
I was last night.
And amongst your many credentials to be here is that you are an award-winning writer. And originally, I first knew you from your work in Rolling Stone and Esquire for just music.
To this day, it's funny because, it's been a while. I've contributed some things over recent years, but it's been a little while, and I fell into TV like 20 years ago. Right. But no matter where I go, I am introduced as, Rolling Stone's David Wild.
Now, you've been doing TV and producing TV, and you've won awards for your TV stuff, and particularly your Grammy Award stuff, and every Grammy Award since 2001?
Yes, 23rd year this year.
Which are great, but also those damn the amazing Grammy specials that...
I love those Grammy specials.
I love them too. It's to me, those specials and the Grammy Awards. The Grammy Awards is the best award show, period. Because I don't give a shit who wins anything. I'm seeing great music all the time. It's really well put together.
Music help. I also, as someone, your dad sort of did variety and all that. Mm-hmm. I've done Emmys and Oscars and Grammys for 23 years now, but there's no comparison in terms of if it was a gymnastic, move, the level of difficulty of the Grammys, getting 20 performances on those stages and pulling it off, and literally getting all those people backstage, getting all those things hung in the rafters and getting them on and off. And also for me, part of my job writing for musicians, it's a lot different. Whereas compared to Emmys or Oscars in a certain way, you're writing for the best actors in the world to throw to a video clip mostly. So we're very proud of the Grammys.
It's spectacular, and
thank you.
I never miss it, and I always am. I tell people to watch it just because you're going to see something on that show you will never see again. It's always there's a one-of-a-kind, always performance that you will never see ever. So I've got many questions to you, but this podcast is about me and dealing with my problems.
I listen to your podcast. I'm well aware of it.
I'm glad you are one of the 4 listeners.
My wife, there's another one. There's 5.
Okay. Those are 5 listeners.
Yes.
Well, I thank...
Because my wife doesn't hate you yet. She doesn't know you well enough to not like you. Whereas mine, she knows.
It takes about 12 episodes for you to hate me. So she has to really get into the oeuvre, my canon, and then she'll really despise me. Or she can just talk to my wife.
You say oeuvre, sort of, it sounds a little Oprah-like.
Yeah.
I believe the French is oeuvre.
That's fine.
Okay, I'm French.
Good. Yeah, it's all good.
Very continental.
My issue is... And I just talked about it in a very recent show that I just had about fame, is there's something about being in the show business that I like. I like being able to deal with people who have touched me, whose art matters to me, that I'm close to it. I've grown up in Los Angeles around it, and it's kind of interesting. And it's also interesting to see how fame fades and things don't work. But you've had a career where you've gotten to meet a lot of interesting people. I don't know if you've met everybody you've ever wanted to meet, but you certainly have met a lot of people that means a lot to you.
It's a very short list of people I wanted to meet who I haven't. I've been extraordinarily lucky in a million ways, but that's definitely one of them. And I want
to talk about the main problem here that I want to talk with you about is, how do you not appear to be a stalker when you're trying to meet the people that you want to meet? Like I'm doing right now with this podcast. I'm calling people I haven't spoken to in a long time and say, hey, you want to be on my show? Like I recently sent an email out to Cameron Crowe, who I kind of know, and Cameron has not responded.
Okay, well you actually wrote me that part.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Cameron. I didn't tell you. Cameron is like a friend of mine.
Yeah.
After the Grammys this year, the first 2 emails I got were from 2 great directors,
right?
Cameron Crowe and Taylor Hackford. All that being said, I did send a private message on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, when we started the podcast, asking Cameron to be on.
Right.
Never responded. Now, when I wrote him a question about Joni and his opinion on something, he called me. We talked. So it may be.
But you're not close enough to say, hey, why didn't you respond?
I think I don't. That's not my style.
Right. This is why you're not a stalker, seeming like a stalker, whereas I am the kind of guy.
I prefer schnurrer than stalker.
I wrote Cameron and said, hey, Cameron, you remember me from the Gracie Films era when you were working with Jim Brooks and all that? And we knew each other. We hung out a little bit. So I wrote him and then didn't hear anything. And then I wrote back saying, did you get my email? Did you get my email?
Oh.
Right, as opposed to letting it go. I didn't just let it go. I went back.
I've let it go with everyone.
Yeah.
And I'll ask once. I get a pretty high level of positive responses, but if I don't get a positive response, I would never go back. It's very interesting. You saying this to me, I learned about myself from you raising this issue, because I don't think of myself as much as I think about myself all the time. It's Brad Paisley, actor Brad Paisley.
Oh my God.
Okay, well, let's put him on your podcast.
Oh my God, I'm such a huge fan.
Hey.
Welcome back to America. I am on a podcast, not my own, with one of your biggest fans, Jay Kogan.
Oh, very nice.
And his son is a singer-songwriter who worships you apparently too.
Yes.
So at some point, I'm going to bug you about that. But should I call you back after this?
Yeah, of course.
Hey, let me ask Brad, can I bill you as a guest on my podcast now that you've called in?
Yeah, put me on. That's
okay,
great.
fantastic.
So
it's Brad Paisley with David Wild.
Exactly.
Tell me how I can support it with social media. And
because there's nothing wrong with social media these days.
That's
it's all
right.
good. But I literally I have so much to tell you and so much Dodger talk. Jay is wearing a Brooklyn Dodgers hat.
Yes.
So he's and I actually took my Dodgers hat off for I think a Justin Timberlake hat from the other night, so I look like a friggin' douchebag.
I don't even know what you would look like with that. That's like weird old man.
It does look like a weird old man.
Exactly.
It's true.
It actually also says weird old man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome back.
All right. Call me later.
Bye.
Have fun.
Wow. Okay, so now there you go. This is a hero. Brad Paisley is an enormously talented guy, not just for country music, but music. He's an incredible songwriter, incredible singer,
Guitar god.
guitar hero,
And funny as hell.
and apparently really nice, smart guy in addition to all those things.
It's really funny, like the nature of being friends when you grew up in this business, you're well known, you're famous in, I'm sure, Simpsons historians or in a certain subgroup.
And it's subgroup
Right.
of a Reddit, and then a subgroup of that, and then I'm famous. Yes.
But it's a really interesting thing when someone like you or me, and I'm not putting myself on your level, but
You should.
But when you're friends with someone who is legitimately
Right.
famous,
Yes.
it's very interesting. And like even the pandemic was educational to my wife, because I think on a certain level she was like always a little bit like, they're not your friends. They're not your friends.
Right.
But then when all of a sudden we were locked up in a house together for 2 years, she was
Right.
like seeing who called me.
Right.
And she was like, oh my God, you
Right.
have friends.
Right.
Like,
Right.
You don't just annoy me, you annoy some of the most famous
Exactly.
people in the world. And she was like shocked by it.
One of the things that's true about you, and I've been fascinated by, and I think it's maybe true about me, but less so, you don't seem ever unhappy or jaded about entertainment. Like you're a fan of these people. You're a fan of music. You like good music, but you don't concentrate on the things you don't like. You talk about the things you do like, and you're always excited about new work and new people and new things coming on. And you're not like, there's no blaseness about you after having done this for so many years.
I hope that's a compliment. It's
a high compliment.
I'll take it as
because
a compliment.
because I think that the art is worth admiring, and becoming jaded, you lose a part of your soul when you become jaded.
It's interesting. I think part of it is music as opposed to movie stars, because weirdly my life has I deal with a lot of movie stars, TV stars, and music. Music is a different beast in my heart. I don't have any musical talent. I took 4 guitar lessons from a guy who had been thrown out of Sha Na Na at a Teaneck, New Jersey guitar shop. I had no ability. I wrote one song that was like the worst imitation of David Gates and Bread ever.
Okay.
To me, music.
You're supposed to write 10,000 bad songs, and then you'll write the good one.
Right. I never got past the first song.
Yeah.
Baby, it's time I'm a leaving, I think it was.
Okay,
It was like,
sure.
My baby, I'm a want you kind of
Right, sure.
rip off.
I'll leavin'.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And I think there are a lot of rock critics
Right.
who are frustrated rock stars
Right.
who wanted to be, and many of them, what's weird is I know a number of them that now go on and make their own albums and stuff like that. Whereas I am just a pure lover. I think it's magic, and it's funny, I hosted a show on Bravo for a couple seasons called Musicians, which was like the musical version of Inside the Actors Studio,
Right.
except not popular.
Mm-hmm.
And but it was great, and I'm really proud of the job I did on it. I literally was originally asked to write and produce it, and then they fired the executive producer, and then a year later they called me and said, do you want to host it? And like, I had been in charge of finding a host, and I had not thought of me.
Wow,
like,
you Dick Cheney'd yourself.
Exactly.
Okay.
No, I didn't Dick
Yeah.
Cheney, because I had suggested Steve Van Zandt,
Right.
who's been on our podcast
Sure.
with Phil, and I had suggested Elvis Costello,
Right.
who ended up having his own
Right.
show like that for
Right.
later.
I was not in the mix. I was not,
You were not ever mentioned.
Okay, all right, just check.
But in any case, I just think part of it is I have never not been in love with music and the people who make it. And it's funny because I try not to be, and I don't think I am an ass kisser. It's funny, I listened to a podcast of someone I won't mention, and I realized every single person they have on their show, oh my God, your new album's the greatest album
Right.
ever made. And it's like, boy, it's an amazing coincidence.
Right.
You keep having people who've made the greatest album of all time.
Now I just realized I should be saying more of that to my guests. I'm really not. I'm not complimenting my guests enough at all.
But what I think part of the reason, I'm going to stop patting myself on the back, but I think part of the reason, because you when you raised this issue, I thought, well, part of it, the response I do get is, you get it. You know my stuff. And
Right.
I remember Joe Jackson I don't know if you like Joe Jackson at all.
Sure, stepping out.
Yes.
Come on, I know.
So Joe Jackson was one of the first interviewers who was I was a huge fan of. I just grew up in the age of Elvis Costello, Joe Jackson, Graham Parker. I got to act in This Is 40, a scene with Graham Parker.
Oh, wow.
I got to work with Elvis a great deal, both in TV a little bit and in as an interviewer and all that. But with Joe Jackson, I met him the first time, and he was horrible to me, like a total douche. And I said, after like 15, 20 minutes of it, I said, you know what, Joe, I'm going to leave because you clearly don't want me to ask you any questions. And I don't want my love of your music to be ruined by this experience. So I'm just going to leave. And he said, I am so sorry. He goes, I am so used to dealing with people who ask stupid questions, who don't know anything about who I am, that I assume everyone is like that. And I apologize, so let's start again. And we did, and it was fine. Cut to, I moved out here, this is 91, and he played the Universal Amphitheater when that existed. And I was in the front row, I had tickets in the front row, and he had me removed. Only time during a show I've ever had the artist say, can we remove David Wilde from the front row? I can't have a critic I know staring at me. So they moved me back. I downgraded my seats.
Right.
So a little bit of a douchebag, but a genius. But in other words, a musical genius, not a personal genius.
Yeah.
Bad interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
Don't be alone with Jake Hogan.
I can spend time criticizing Joe Jackson's work and say the stuff I loved and stuff I didn't love, but it doesn't seem like that's the kind of thing that you would spend any time doing. You just talk about the stuff that you loved and the stuff that meant something to you and move on.
Well, I'll tell you, it's not 100% true. When I was the music editor of Rolling Stone for like a fairly long period, one of the things I had to do was oversee the record review section. And often what I would have to do is, in those days, you'd have like, a certain amount of inches of copy. So I would often have like to fill at the end of the record review section, and I would do a 1-paragraph review, and it was often a 1-star review, like making fun of something. Right. And I regret some of them. I'm afraid to run into anyone from Johnny Hates Jazz. Sure. Because my review was David hates Johnny Hates Jazz, which isn't even true. Right. I think the Cutting Crew got it bad.
Sure.
I'm not the biggest 80s fan, but in my milieu of like 70s singer-songwriters, I tend to be... I love a lot.
Well, my former friend Cameron Crowe used to tell me that if you had the Rolling Stone greatest... best records collection of all the things that Rolling Stones said was best records, you'd have the worst record collection of all time. Because they gave high marks to things that were terrible and low marks to things that were amazing. And so,
I'm more interested, I think, if anything, my specialty at the magazine became, if I love something with a pure heart that other critics didn't, I think I had a reputation for not being afraid to say that. And also, I'm not saying by taste, it's like, I seem like every other person I knew at Rolling Stone when I got there wanted to talk only about the Velvet Underground. This is like in the 80s. But I got there, and like, I've been raised by my mother on Neil Diamond. And like, one of my first days at Rolling Stone, I was walking down the hall, and Jan Wenner walked out of his office and said, "Who likes Neil Diamond? Does anybody fucking love Neil Diamond?" And I went, I do. I raised my hand because he's one of the important artists in my childhood. He was my Jewish Elvis. Sure. He sent me out to L.A., right? Actually, which is fine, but it ain't home. I said nauseous at this comment. Right. But it was, I wrote about him. I mentioned at some point in there that my mom had turned me on to his music and loved him. Right. Just to show you how being, like, again, I wasn't faking what I thought about him. I just showed him the respect of, and again, he's now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Now people realize one of the great singer-songwriters of his time, and the work is really enduring. Songs like Sweet Caroline have entered the American Songbook and all that. Right. But at the time, in 1980, whatever, it was not a point where he was used to getting a lot of respect. The fact that I did a in-depth interview and knew his stuff, he then was like love. We became friends,
Right.
including I wrote an email to his wife, Katie, 2 days ago asking for a quote for some book I'm writing. And they were like, we're so happy to hear from you. I think we'll love to help you if we can on this.
Right.
But what happened, just to tell you how being nice, again, and I think our friend Phil Rosenthal,
Yes.
maybe it's part of, I had not thought about this until you raised the issue, but I think of him as being more nice than I am, but
catch him on the right day.
Yeah, exactly. But in any case, Neil then called me and said, your mother lives in New Jersey, right? I go, yeah. He goes, would you bring her to see my show at the Brendan Byrne Arena or whatever it was? I said, absolutely. Went with my friends and family, brought my mother, right without telling me, right before he went on, a security guard came up to my mother and said, Mr. Diamond would like to see you. She then was brought back, and we were sort of watching, brought her into the dressing room, had every bit of his merchandise signed to her, and said, Carol Wilde, I'd be honored if you'd take a picture with me. You raised a real mensch.
Aww.
And that picture of her with Neil Diamond was on her bedside literally till the day she died.
Oh, wow.
And you think, again, just as an example of like, there's nothing, I love Neil Diamond. I love him today. Yeah. But I feel like if you stand up for who you respect and love and treat everyone decently, there are big benefits. And for me, if I remember Steven Tyler at one point saying to me, I like working with you. He goes, I'm the rock star. Because what he said is a lot of journalists at a certain point and at different eras, and this is true, I guess, in TV journalism or whatever, acted like they were the star. They sort of made it about them.
Right.
And he goes, you just know my music and you ask good questions.
One of your early claims to fame is you did liner notes for Frank Sinatra.
What happened was I came out here in 90, I think it was, to interview Joni Mitchell, Sinead O'Connor, and Winona Ryder, or one of them, and ended up sticking around saying, Jan said, stay there and do a cover story on Sinead, stay there and do a Joni Mitchell story, stay there and do a cover story on Winona Ryder. And he finally said, you should just move there.
Right.
Like you're there. They didn't have a West Coast bureau chief at that point. And I just broken up with a woman at Rolling Stone. I was happy to get out of the office. I liked LA, but I said, I don't drive. And he goes, I'll get you a driving teacher. And he got me this guy who worked out of Harlem. And I just drove for like 2 or 3 weeks learning how to drive in Harlem. But my first drives were when I got here, I was like, I had no real friends. And so I drove to Vegas every week and I would go see Sinatra by myself. And Frank, at a certain late stage in his career, heard about this, and so they asked me to write the liner notes. And
doesn't that sound, again, stalkery? Like, why are you not considered a stalker? The guy who drives to Las Vegas from Los Angeles every weekend, sits in the same seat or near seat, and then instead of security escorting you out, they say, "Hey, let's get this guy in and talk to me."
I guess I'm charming.
Yeah,
no,
I guess so.
No, I mean, I think my love and knowledge of people's musical careers.
Yeah.
They like that.
I guess so.
They like to feel understood.
Now, let's go back to Elvis Costello, because you said Elvis Costello is one of the touchstones for you, and in the early Joe Jackson, Elvis Costello, and you said
Graham
Parker. And I've talked about this before on this very show, which I've met Elvis Costello.
I heard on your Amy Mann a little bit. You talked to Amy Mann.
I've talked about Elvis with Elvis on several occasions, and I'd love to have him on the show, but there's no way. I don't even know how to stalk him to get him on the show, but I could maybe try. But anyway, I've met him on several occasions. At each occasion, I wanted to say something more than, "You're cool."
Yeah.
And I have not been able to. I'm such a fan. Your music has meant a lot to me. I find it really nourishing to my soul and my brain.
Can I tell you, it's interesting because with the topic that you brought up, just in my defense for someone listening to it, reading between the lines, thinking, oh, this guy's like an ass kisser journalist. No, I'm just saying that could be how people might perceive it.
That's not what I
But I will just tell you, for example, Elvis being my hero, literally, like in my high school, I probably listened to Get Happy, My Aim Is True, This Year's Model, more than any record, Armed Forces. I probably listened to those more than any record I ever have.
Me too.
Cut to my first chance to meet him was when I got to Rolling Stone and he put out Spike.
Right.
And it was an amazing series of experiences because first of all, I think I brought 2 records to jog discussion. I had already gotten the advance on the McCartney record that he had co-written.
Right.
And I brought a Chet Baker release. This was an advance that had a version of
My Aim Is True. Blue.
Almost Blue.
Almost Blue. That's right.
So I had those two in my pocket, and I went to interview him to do the Rolling Stone interview, which was, for those who don't know, like sort of like the career interview.
Right.
Elvis wanted to not do the career interview. He just wanted to talk about Spike,
right,
the new record. We got to San Francisco, sat down to breakfast, and here I am with literally, easily one of my greatest heroes, and we fought. Because he said, I don't want to talk about that.
Right.
I don't want to talk about that. And primarily, I began to realize what it was a career interview for Elvis at that point would mean you had to discuss a couple incidents where he got himself in trouble,
right,
and was misperceived or misbehaved.
Well,
and
I think he misbehaved.
Yes, I know he misbehaved.
Yeah.
And I had to ask him about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so that's not something, I didn't want to ruin his day,
right,
but we basically had a first breakfast. Our first conversation was an argument. And then I broke enough of his spirit and we had the discussion in the second meeting, and it was like, that's what ran in the magazine. And I think it was a really good interview.
Yeah.
I've had to do that. Van Morrison, another hero of mine, where we got into he ran away from me. He literally fled the scene of the interview, and I had to chase him through Harvard Square. It's a long, famous, it's famous. It's my story I have to tell at cocktail parties and dinner parties all the time. But so I do try to do my job as a journalist.
Sure.
That's an example.
You can ask the hard questions, but I think you always approach it as somebody who appreciates and loves the artist. Yes. Like which I assume that most music critics ultimately love music, but they don't always approach it like they're there to try to get a sense of what this artist is about, so that they were able to create something that I love.
See, I have a theory that what's happened in journalism, the economics of journalism, have changed a little bit where we're at with that, in that I think I read, in addition to social media where you need to say something controversial to get attention, you also, I think a lot of journalists are it's a rougher job than I had. Like when I was at Rolling Stone, it's like someone would have to write a letter to the editor to complain, as opposed to instant, social media F you or unlike, or, writing horrible shit about you. And also being a journalist, I think paid better then 25 years ago than it does now. And every time you look, magazines are folding right and left. It's a rough business. Yeah. And I think that bleeds into a little bit, I read more resentment of talent than I ever have. I think because people perceive musicians' life as much better, which is true.
I guess so, but it's still pretty tough to be a musician. I mean, like, it's harder to be a rock journalist, but it's also hard to make a living as a musician who's not Taylor Swift.
100%. And I thought that was interesting, some of the stuff you got into with Amy.
Yeah.
Because she's an example of someone who's just great.
Yeah, she's amazing, and she's found a way to make it work. And it's fascinating. And she says it's lucky that she has built up enough fan base over the years to be able to work and make a living. But that's not the case for my Charlie Cogan, who wants to be a singer-songwriter and maybe be a performer, but more songwriting producer kind of guy. Where do you begin and how do you make money at it? And if you're not just in a posse of people that right now songs are being created by 40 people in a mix of tapes being sent around and all this kind of stuff, it's like hard to do to make a living.
It's fascinating because I'm still in the music world and I'm around it, but also I have my nephew is a big music manager now. Like, he literally, when his parents split up, he would come hang out at a lot of my shows, and he's now become, literally, he manages a couple of the big stars.
Oh, great!
Right now, he's young, and so you'll have to give me your son's material for him.
Yeah.
And it will do no good coming from me because
he's busy.
I'm an old man.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated with how different the music business is now. And if your personality is like, if you don't want to be a social media presence, it's rough.
All right. Well, you haven't really helped me figure out how not to be a stalker, David, but because you're it's not your thing. It's like you don't bother people. You ask once and walk away. That's so not chutzpah and Jewishy of you.
I'll give you I'm even more low key than that. An example that's amazing to me is 4 years ago, 6 years ago. I think 4 years ago.
I'm going to say 4.
4.
I know what you're talking about.
4 years ago, my nephew, the manager,
Yes.
and I got on a plane. I was going to New York to do the Grammys when we did it in New York that year. Our host was James Corden, and I was going to meet the week before the show, flying in. Right before I left, I'd been in the office, and I'd said, let's give out the Comedy Awards, since we have Dave Chappelle and Jerry Seinfeld both nominated. They'll both be in New York.
Right.
That is exciting.
Sure.
We would never, I don't think, given out the Comedy Award on the main show in years. So we did that, and I had said, who can we have present it? Who would be good? And I said, I love Trevor Noah. Like, I've read his book, which I don't know if you've read, but it's great. I've always wanted to meet him. Let's ask Trevor Noah. I get the call back saying he'll be in Florida next weekend, so he can't do it. I get on the plane with my nephew. He goes, do you want to sit together? Like, we can switch our seats and sit together. And I'm like, I see you enough. I'll just, and I was going to sleep. I get up to my seat. Trevor Noah is sitting next to me. So not a stalker.
Right.
I didn't say hello. I didn't want to bother him. I didn't want to do anything. Right. But about 3/4 through, I'm watching a football game on the TV or something, and he starts asking me a question. And so then, since we're introducing each other, I said, and I'm so sorry you're going to be in Florida next weekend because I'm sorry you can't do the Grammys. And he goes, I can't what? No one had asked him.
Right.
It's like the publicist thing that goes on sometimes.
Sure.
And he goes, no, I'm playing Friday night in Florida. I'm just going to stick around and swim, but I'll come back on Saturday for the Grammys. He did. And that was the beginning of the relationship with the Grammys.
Now
and he's not hosted.
Exactly.
And he's fantastic.
He's really good.
He's a wonderful, wonderful talent. But that's like, I'm shy, in fact.
And let me tell you how polite I am. I knew this story, and I didn't interrupt. I let you tell it. I let you tell the whole thing. I didn't add into it. I didn't break the rhythm of it. So I'm proud of myself.
I'm sorry.
No, I love that story. It's really, that is the kismet of showbiz. That is like, if without you on that plane, we wouldn't have this great host of the Grammys.
We might.
I don't think so. Honestly, I don't think so, because that relationship, he flew in, the producers now know who he is. There's a relationship.
He did great.
He did great, and he built, some kind of camaraderie and connection there. And so now he's the host.
Right, but also just as an example, like, I have not had a Grammy host not be great to deal with. Like, I think it is, if you make people's jobs easier, which is, like, as writers and as a producer, your job is to make their job easier. And as a journalist, if you're not a douchebag, I think you end up like, people want to be around people and want to work with people who make their lives easiher.
Yeah.
So it's like, by the way, like, Trevor Noah makes the Grammys job much easier. He's just phenomenal and wonderful and a great sort of, just has a great style for it. And LL Cool J, who was like someone who I worked with the most on the Grammys, just like, he's like the greatest quarterback you could ever have on a team. And like, so it's like, am I happy to be a guy, hiking the ball to him every time?
Don't be alone with Jake Hogan.
Well, now we're going to roll into our listener mail segment.
Oh.
Now it's time for listener mail.
All right, so this is sent in by listener Maynard. And listener Maynard asks us, but really it's for my guest, how do you define failure or success?
Failure? Okay, I'll just say, like, in my weird world of writing for TV, I've experienced very much the best and the worst of what you can experience. I remember writing on the Oscars when it was James Franco and Anne Hathaway. Wow. And I remember hanging out with Justin Timberlake at the end, who was on that show. And I may have revealed this before, but the producers had asked me to ask him to host. And I had asked him, and he had said, because he had just done his movie, The Social Network.
Yes.
And he goes, I think it's too early for me. Let's ask me another time. Of course, that never ended up happening, and or not, at least not yet. But at the end of the show, he goes, I was like, oh my God, this is rough. And he goes, you'll survive. And so my wife, who was at an Oscar party and turned down tickets, perhaps wisely, to go to that show, I said, we'll survive this, like repeating what Justin had just said, and she didn't answer. She was like, it felt like we had to go into the witness relocation program.
It's one of the most famous collapses of all time.
And I've been a part of another, like one of the worst, maybe the worst Emmys.
Let's back up. What happened?
It's all about chemistry. He, I believe, was on some sort of performance art mission he actually said it. I remember, because I was driving to my in-laws when one of the producers in that show called me and said, we have our host. And I went, who is it? I was so excited. Is it going to be Billy Crystal? Is it going to be Jerry Seinfeld? Is it going to be
the funny Anne Hathaway and
James Franco? And I went, what?
Yeah.
And then that night, I believe, James went on the Jimmy Kimmel show, and he said, I'm going to try to be the worst host in Oscar history. And I want to say, he achieved that dream.
He did it.
Then what I really think happened was, she, just energy-wise, it comes down to and this comes up a lot on Donny and Marie. I talked about Donny and Marie with Donny in our episode recently, and it's like, you have to have a dynamic. If you have co-hosts, it's hard enough to have a host for something in this world today. It's hard to host these shows. As Joe Coy found out when he did the show recently, it's like people are waiting to make fun of you. So, but with two people, how do you do it? You need a dynamic. And that's why, when Brad Paisley and Karen Underwood started doing CMAs years ago, they had a great decade run, or more than a decade run. And the only thing I was smart about, I'm not smart about that much, but I was like, we need a dynamic. And I said, so I want to start you guys out as being somewhere, split the difference between Donny and Marie and Sonny and Cher, because it's like the sisterly thing of putting the brother down, and it's also the wife putting the husband down. But you need a playful dynamic in some way to define what you're doing out there, and then you make it whatever it becomes eventually. But I feel so I think that's one of the
hard to do with people who aren't a team. So you have to establish that early on and then play into that for a long time. In other words, if she came out and said, oh, James Franco, and try to establish that he's this annoying little brother character to me, that's hard to establish.
Well, actually, what's funny is the real dynamic. I believe we should have played the truth of it, because what it was is Anne Hathaway, just personality-wise, is like the most adorable girl in your theater camp who tries so hard. James's reaction to that, now, I don't know what exactly, it was just very clear he was not digging whatever her energy was. He was trying to fuck with it, trying to make fun of it. He literally, early on, I think in the monologue, I need to go back, there was a moment where you see him rolling his eyes at her. And the truth is, she was just trying. But him so not trying made her trying look crazy, so that they both look crazy.
Too cool. He wanted to be too cool for the Oscars, but guess what? You're at the Oscars, you're hosting it. You can't be too cool. You got to do it.
By the way, you cannot be too cool in hosting, because you're there. You can be too cool and say no to hosting.
You're not above it. You're in it. You are.
You were literally there.
Exactly.
He completely. It was his fault. He was kind of a jerk to us. He was totally a jerk to her. At one point, I was with Bruce Valanche and John Max and other people backstage trying to discuss what are we going to do about this nightmare of a show we're about to do. And we looked at it and we said, oh my God, James is smiling at her. And what it was she had gone to the ladies' room and he was smiling at her attractive stand-in. He was giving nothing. And it was almost like he was a jerk. And it turns out, I think he was kind of a jerk.
Apparently, he had some issues.
Yes.
Yeah. So we don't know. But so in terms of the actual what is failure, what is success?
That's failure.
So that's failure. Okay.
And success is not that.
Okay. Success is the other version of that.
It's when it's not that bad. When a show goes well, you feel great after. I woke up after the Grammys this year, and the ratings were way up, and the reviews were great, and you feel great when you put something out there and it gets destroyed, which we've probably both done. I feel like I literally remember after the Oscars feeling like I've been beaten.
Yeah.
Like you just feel sore from all of the punches you take.
But then don't you? Is there ever something that you've done where it got horrible reviews or didn't get the reviews you wanted, but you felt it was a better show than that? I think it was better. It was better than that.
Yes, ratings don't always follow from being good, and
because I can stand tall on something that may not be perceived as wonderful, but it's sort of like, I think it's great, and I wouldn't change it, or I would change only bits and pieces of it. Overall, I think it's pretty good, and if I was watching it at home, I would love it. That, to me, is success.
Do you go back and watch stuff you did?
Never. Holy shit, I'd blow my brains out.
I never did until the social media age ever look at articles I wrote. You know, there were like 20 years of Rolling Stone articles, and I always just assumed I wouldn't like it. Mm-hmm. And then every once in a while, someone will send me a link to something, and you go, I was afraid. And it's like every once in a while I go, oh, I used to be okay.
Yeah.
It's
some
like
of the
nice
stuff. I watch an old Simpsons episode of Bart the Daredevil and go, this is funny.
Yes.
I can do that now.
Yeah.
But I'm very also, when I watch something, I see all the flaws and the things I would fix.
Yes.
And the stuff that bothers me. And it's like, if I had to do it over again, I would do this. And so I get very frustrated by some of that.
Yep.
But overall, I'm okay with some of that.
You do learn from failure. You do learn, like I learned on another of the worst shows of all time was the reality host hosting the Emmys. And the executive producer, took me and another writer and said, let's go tell these guys they can't, because the host only wanted to improv an opening. These were the reality hosts saying, we don't want a written, like Judd Apatow, all sorts of people had said, do this. And they said, no, we want to do, like, literally go out there and just prove that we can improv. The worst idea in history. And the executive producer, we were all going to walk in and say, guys, you can't do this.
Right.
And then he walked in by himself and he came out and said, nope, they're doing it. And I said, and I'm proud of this, and this is something I've learned, I said, cut the item. Right. Just don't have an opening. It is better not to have an opening. Let's just go right into the first award. No one will, the show will end quicker. Yeah. And I've learned, if there's something you feel is disastrous,
you have to speak up.
Stop it.
Yeah.
Say something.
Show ruining. That's one of the cardinal rules of working in a creative forces, a creative endeavor, is stop the thing that's going to ruin it.
Yes.
Like I have when network notes, I have a rule. If a note is lateral, take it. Take the lateral note. If a note is good, a good suggestion, fantastic. Thank them and praise them for their great note. And if a note is ruining the thing that you're trying to do, you fight it with everything you can.
I can't go into the details, but even on the Grammys this year, there was something where I had to piss off one of my biggest heroes of all time and say, no, you can't do that, because I know you learn over 20 years, like, the thing that could literally end the show.
All right. Well, I'm glad you fought, because the show is great as always, and I always look forward to it.
Thank you.
Last thing we do here is the moment of joy.
A moment of joy.
What's a thing that just gives you a moment of joy during your day or during your week that you just go, this is fantastic?
I'll bring it up just because it's very much in my mind, because I've left this being to be here. Is like 2 weeks ago, my wife, who never wanted a dog, who never had a dog, said, we're getting a dog. And so I have this puppy in my life right now. And I realize, like, it's like having, and it's more, I've always been like one of those, as an actual parent, like, I hate when people go, I'm a dog parent.
Right,
it's like,
exactly.
And I'm like, now here I am. I'm exactly
Is this your
going
first
through
dog?
This. No, I had a dog as a kid, but not since then.
I see.
And my wife's never had one.
What made her decide we need to have a dog?
I think she wanted something in the house she could love, and she knew that it wasn't going to be
you.
me.
Yeah,
yes,
of course.
Something cute.
Sure, something adorable.
Yes.
Something fluffy. My wife grew up hating dogs, and the whole family disliked dogs, were afraid of dogs. I think one of her sisters got bitten by a dog and was just like, no dogs. And I've always had dogs.
Yes.
And so the first dog we shared together, she didn't like that dog. The second dog we had was a Labradoodle, and she liked the dog, but basically they're my dogs.
Right.
And most recently, when our son went to college, she said, I need a dog. And she changed. She picked out a dog, and she got her first, literally, this is her dog.
Right.
Her first dog. And she loves this dog so much, dog Lulu. Unbelievably, feisty, angry, and I think a little racist. But she loves the dog anyway. We make a lot of excuses for it. Everything.
Yes.
She thinks she's like white and Southern and doesn't like anything else other than that. But she's very fluffy and cute, and she uses it against me. But love having it. But it was interesting to watch my wife change from a non-dog person to a dog person so completely.
That's where my wife is at. And it was so, like, I was, in Vegas with Phil for a night, and yet she's sending me pictures, like, and it's adorable. Like, he missed me, apparently. Yeah. And, like, she sent a picture of him, like, in bed with my socks around his face, like going, the only living thing that likes your socks.
Well, David, thank you for being here, and thank you for being so smart and wonderful, and I expected nothing less.
Thank you very much for having me. I know it was a pity booking that when you came to our show, which, by the way, we have to do the competition to see whose show airs first.
Okay, well, we'll see.
You're going to be after Donny.
No, you have a lifetime of work. This barely scratches the surface. I have so much more to ask you about.
Well, you can't.
All right. Well, maybe we will someday. Maybe when we go into double digits.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for being here, my listeners, my 4 listeners. I really appreciate it. Please feel
Fab
free to...
Four, they call them.
That's right. Please feel to email me at dbawjk@gmail.com if you have any suggestions or comments or questions for our guests. And now that you've been alone with Jake Hogan, go be alone with somebody else. Have a conversation with somebody. Have a life. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.